Hello, writers, come write with me. My name is Michaela Greenwood. I create worlds for mind adventures. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Write with Michaela. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so you can go on this journey with me. Today is story time, or the day of our chapter exchange. I am hoping to get chapters from you from either plot. I am releasing 2 videos on some Tuesdays to read your writing from your writing prompts, and 2 videos on some Fridays to read your chapters for those of you where I have permission to read them on the channel. So basically your work will be extra videos, but everything else will be the same for my viewers. I will label chapters from plot 1 as season 1 and plot 2 as season 2. If you're writing with me and you wish to exchange chapters, then I need written permission to read your chapter on the channel, as I've discussed before. Writers may send their chapters in PDF or Word document format to writewithmichaela@gmail.com. I will post the email address at the end of the video. Please do not send Google Docs. I'm not making any promises to read every chapter sent to me on the channel, but I intend to read all the chapters you send me. All chapters read on Fridays, whether they are mine or another writer's work, are copyright protected material, and no one may use any part in writing their own stories. This new story is also probably PG-13 because there are vicious dogs and soldiers that are known to burn witches. So if you're under 13 years of age, you need parental guidance. This story is in its rough draft stage, just like the last story we heard. I have actually finished it, and I'm doing the first read-through right now, but I've already put in a lot of edits. The title of this story is Tajiia, and today we are reading chapter... Is this chapter 1? It should be chapter 2. Huh? It's chapter 2. We already read chapter 1. One viewer wanted to know if he could have something to read along with as I read. So if that's something you would like, then email me and ask me for the chapter. Make sure you are specific about either City of the Ancients or Tajiia and which chapter. If you say 1 and I'm reading 2, then they won't match. But we are reading chapter 2 today. I will create a PDF of the chapter. The PDF, once created, won't receive any edits, and it may or may not match exactly what I read on the channel, since sometimes I go off script and ad lib. Sometimes I just, in the middle of the scene, I just start editing in my head and I read that. So then I have to go back and watch the video to try to type it in the book. Anyway, I'll create the PDF, and that's what I can offer if that's what you would like. Before we start, last Friday I read a name, and it was supposed to be Tajiia Ch, but somehow I spelled it with a BR once or twice in the story. So I was trying to figure things out as I read them on the channel. I was just like, what? And later I checked my character list, and I spelled it Tajiia Ch with a BY. I used Microsoft Word's feature of Control, Find, Replace, and Word fixed the spelling in the 2 places that I had it incorrectly. And then that's what editing is for, is to catch and fix mistakes. And sometimes I catch mistakes when I read the story out loud as well. So when I was pausing last week and I couldn't pronounce the name, it's because it was spelled differently than I remembered. So that's fixed now. Now let's start chapter 2, part of my name. In the morning, Tajiia got up again like normal. She had purchased some ground grain yesterday, so she made some biscuits and flat cakes. She wouldn't eat it all today, but she could eat them over the next several days. Last night she had killed a raccoon, and it was a bit heavier than the squirrels she brought to the village center yesterday. She wrapped the raccoon in a sack so the whole village wouldn't know about it. Sometimes people got quite upset when they saw a raccoon. Tajiia made it to the butcher without incident. Even the wind wasn't blowing as fiercely today. Mr. Conness greeted her like normal, and when he saw the large bundle, he walked around the counter and took it from her. He walked back around and set it on the scale. Wow. I hope your dad saw the raccoon first and he wasn't bitten. Tajiia slightly shook her head no. Did he remember the solitaire? Tajiia reached in the pocket of her cloak and pulled out a pouch. Mr. Conness eagerly held out his hand, took the pouch, and opened it. This is awesome, said Mr. Conness. He reached in his cash box and pulled out money. He handed her some and said, That's for the raccoon, and this is for the solitaire. Tajiia slightly smiled and nodded her head once. She put the money away and then headed out. She pulled up her hood as she exited the door. Tajiia scanned around as she headed on her normal path. The soothsayer was not in sight anywhere. The few villagers she saw were sparse, and there were extra huntsmen in the village on horses patrolling. Tajiia decided she would just get milk and eggs and head home. Something in the air said it wasn't safe to be out today. Tajiia tried hard to remember which house was for the woman with the chickens, because even she wasn't out. Finally, when she was fairly sure, she knocked on the door, and the woman answered. The woman stood in the doorway, and she just stared at Tajiia. Her gaze went up and down. Then, behind the woman, a man walked up. It was the man that had been interested in the children. He, too, eyed Tajiia. Then he said, Eggs? Tajiia nodded and held up 2 fingers. The woman left. Tajiia, your father, Gisor, should be doing the bartering, said the man. If it weren't for all the additional huntsmen in the village, then he would want to walk Tajiia home and have a conversation with Tajiia's father. But maybe he would after the extra huntsmen left. He knew when even the soothsayer wasn't out, then no one else should be out either. Shortly after, the woman came back with 2 eggs, and Tajiia handed over the coins. Shortly, the woman came back with 2 eggs, and Tajiia handed over the coins. Suddenly, the woman grabbed Tajiia's hand and bent down to smell it. Solitaire? She questioned. Where did you get it? Tajiia's heart almost froze. She glanced at the man. The man said, Tokrel, you know she's a mute. He turned to Tajiia. Does your mother grow it? Tajiia shook her head no. Did your father find it in the woods? Tajiia nodded, and the woman released her hand. Tokrel looked at the man and said, Well, Barent, ask her if she sold it to Mr. Conness. He knew we wanted some. Tajiia nodded her head. I'll go barter for it, stated Barent. Thanks, Tajiia. If your father... Well, please come talk to us if he finds more. After that experience, Tajiia headed home without milk. But a boy several years older than herself called her. Hey, Tajiia, the goat has a lot of milk today. Tajiia headed towards the boy. She noticed that the huntsmen watched the happenings. They watched her. They watched Barent as he headed to Mr. Conness. When she got to the boy, he held up 1 glass bottle. Just one? Tajiia nodded and handed over the coins. Then she turned and headed home. Once home, Tajiia peeked out the window and saw a huntsman patrolling near her home. She went to the back door and peeked out. Thankfully, they weren't patrolling back there. She went to an inner room and started the loom to weave some cloth. Mostly she used her magic, but she never strayed far from the loom, just in case somebody came in to check on her. Her mother had been very scared of her using, magic in the house and had given strict precautions. Still, Tajiia had a hard time concentrating. The air in the village felt stifling, especially after she recalled seeing a notice posted that read, No one is allowed in the woods at this time, not for anything. If the air had not been so stifling, Tajiia would have laughed because her first thought was, So they believe the animals talk to Mr. Dwandles, and believe there is some strange area in the woods. But she didn't laugh, not even to herself. Now she wondered if the castle was trying to keep them away from the strange area. She went to an outer room and peeked through the curtain once again. The huntsman would peer into the woods, but he didn't enter them. Of course, huntsmen were a lower rank than soldiers, so maybe the soldiers were going in. Tajiia thought of the messenger sent yesterday. It would take 3 to 4 days to reach the castle. So were the extra huntsmen already on their way here? Tajiia thought of the people she had seen last night. None of them had been soldiers. So were their activities against the soldiers or against the castle? She remembered one of them saying something about moving farther away from the castle. Tajiia sighed and went back to the loom. Those people were looking for someone new, and they had part of her name. What if the soldiers arrive in a day or two, and they went into the woods and found the strange area, and the people gave part of her name? Could the castle figure out the whole from the part? And what crime would they pin on her? She needed to go to that special area and listen to those people. As she thought through the conversations she had overheard, it seemed like the people had traveled to the area the night before last and last night. Could she follow them tonight? Tajiia felt she had to try something. She could not just let the village learn she was living alone, because then they would suspect her magic. She rested uneasily until dusk. Then she packed a few biscuits and some water. She extinguished all the lanterns but one, and that one she turned down low. She peeked through the curtain and watched the huntsmen patrol. After the darkness thickened significantly, she invisibly left out the back door. In her nervousness, she knocked over some tools as she headed to the side of the house. Tajiia froze, and the huntsman turned his horse towards her. Then a squirrel fell out of a tree and ran helter-skelter out into the village. Tajiia took that moment to get into the woods. She knew the guard couldn't see her, but he could capture her in a net or by some other means. The squirrel then darted back into the woods. The huntsman thought the disturbance was due to the frightened squirrel, so he resumed his patrol. After a few minutes, the squirrel found Tajiia and climbed up her cloak, though he couldn't see her. His claws, however, small, were very sharp, and Tajiia muffled the sound of pain before it escaped her lips. She reached up her hand and stroked the squirrel. She thought her thanks to him and turned him invisible while he rode her shoulder. In her thoughts, she reminded the squirrel that she hunted and ate his kind. The squirrel thought in return, and she wouldn't hunt and eat him, and that's what mattered. Tajiia thought, if you are the last squirrel left, I will eat you. The squirrel thought, are you going to the strange area today? Again today? Yes, but I don't know if I'm going in. I have a plan. If I stay invisible and get close to another person entering, then the trees will light up like it's only them, and the people won't detect me. But you were invisible yesterday, and the trees detected you, thought the squirrel. But people don't normally talk to trees, so it's okay if the trees know, just not the people. The squirrel swished his tail a few times and then leapt off her shoulder and disappeared into the woods. Tajiia walked along and enjoyed the quiet peace. After a while, Tajiia stopped and looked both ways. She was sure this was where she met the path yesterday, but she didn't see it. She headed northeast anyway and hoped she hadn't missed the people. Not too long afterwards, she came out on the path. Tajiia scanned all around her and knew she was in a different place than where she found the path yesterday. Almost like the path had shrunk down or pulled in closer to its source. Once again, Tajiia walked along in the woods to the left of the path until she had to go around bramble and briar. Finally, she was to the patch of bramble and briar that was before the tree trunks that lit up. She cautiously approached, and the trees didn't light up. So she relaxed and continued. After several more paces, tree trunks started lighting up. This once again startled Tajiia, and she once again checked to make sure she was still invisible. She scrambled back down the path to the nearest opening, but the tree trunks were still lit. She wanted them to turn off, but before she could move farther away, she heard voices once again. "Oh, look! The trees are lit! We are probably steps behind Merk and Varent," said the girl's voice. "Should we run to catch up?" said the boy's voice. "Well, it's not like we can be late," said the girl. "They won't start until everyone is there." "I know," said the boy. "I was ready to take my test the last 2 days. But now, I don't know. Do you think the new person will come today?" "I don't know," replied the boy. "There was hushed talk yesterday." The boy and girl passed Tajiia without glancing towards her. They entered the path between the lit tree trunks and walked down it. But then they stopped and turned back. "Aren't the trees supposed to go to normal after we go so far?" asked the boy. Tajiia felt her fear and nervousness. She stepped out onto the path, checked to make sure she was invisible, and then headed away from the trees that were lit. After several paces, the lights on the first trees turned off, and she could see the boy and girl were continuing. Tajiia wanted to get off the path, but she heard the voices of the men coming towards her. She looked across the path and found a small opening in the bramble. She squeezed in and hoped the thorns didn't catch her cloak. The men stopped on the path right beside her. "I feel magic was used right here," said the first man. "Yes, I feel it too," said the second man. "Ozzy and Balak wouldn't..." He trailed off. "Let's get to the meeting with the others," suggested the first man. Tajiia's heart had almost stopped. These people could feel when someone used magic. They would know she was there if she went. Or maybe they would think it was someone in their group. She needed to know who these people were and what they were doing. Deep within, she felt the huntsmen in her village were there because of these people. These people that had part of her name. Tajiia eased out behind the men. Thankfully, the bramble didn't catch her cloak. After the men walked away, they too turned and noticed the first trees had not stopped shining. Tajiia looked back at the first trees. She didn't want to walk closer to the men, but she had to get those trees to stop shining light. She eased forward as close as she dared and looked back just as the first trees turned off. Tajiia kept pace with the men, and more tree trunks lit up as they traveled forward, and the ones behind them stopped shining. Then they came to a wide open area enclosed by a ring of lit trees. Tajiia could make out that people were entering the area from different directions, and in the center was a huge tree. Globe lights hung all along the limbs, and a man with a scroll stood closer to the tree trunk of the large tree. The boy and girl spotted the men Tajiia had followed, and they ran over. "We thought you were here already," stated the boy. Tajiia decided to stay close to the men. "We saw the tree trunks lit up before we got to them," said the girl. "Well, lots of people use each path," said the first man. "Were either of you practicing for your test before you were on the lit path?" asked the second man. "No, Varent," said the boy. "Neither of us did." "Neither of us would have," said the girl. "All are present," shouted the man near the tree with the scroll. He pushed open a door in the trunk. "Come, let us start our meeting." All the people in the area started filing in the door and down the ramp, and Tajiia noticed that the outermost globe lights were no longer lit. Tajiia wasn't sure how all of these people were going to fit in the tree, and she wasn't sure she wanted to enter such tight quarters. People would feel her even if they couldn't see her. So she decided to shrink down once she got inside. As the crowd neared the tree, more of the outer globe lights went out. Just before she got to the door, she could feel people closing in behind her, so she shrank down before she entered, and then she pressed against the left wall. The ramp down wasn't too steep, but it was long enough for them all to be underground. The ramp opened up to a semi-round room filled with benches, and the room had a stage to the right with 3 small steps leading up to it. A podium was on the stage, and in front of the podium was a lone candle that presently was not lit. The candle stood on a tall stand. People started sitting on the benches. Some headed to the front benches and some to the back ones. The man with the scroll stood in front of all the benches. Tajiia stood under the bench with the 2 men she followed and the boy and the girl. Once everyone had sat, the man at the front called the meeting to order. "Now, I know we all want to meet the new person, so I'll ask that person to stand and introduce yourself, and then we will continue with the meeting." No one stood, and everything was quiet for a few minutes, and then whispering started. The man with the scroll raised his hands. All right. I know the new person is here, or the door to the meeting chamber would not have opened, nor would it have closed behind us. The only people not here have no test before them." Tajiia looked up the ramp to the door. She realized that the closed door trapped her in here with these people, so she hoped that the new person stepped forward. That way the meeting could start and she could learn about these people and their intentions. She wondered how long she needed to have her spells run. She did the invisibility spell quite often, but she didn't often make herself so small. Then a spiral staircase dropped out of the ceiling, and 3 people began to descend. A very regally dressed lady, who had her hair piled on her head, descended before the 2 men. Chancellor Whitecart, she started. "First, let us remember how intimidated we all felt the first time we stumbled into a meeting. And some of us who joined a long time ago didn't have so many faces to look at. Now let me see the scroll." Chancellor Whitecart handed over the scroll. Tajiia at first thought the people on the stairs were new, but then they would have come in the door with all the people, and the man at the front knew them, and they knew him. The lady scanned down the names, and then grabbed the paper beside the name she knew was new. She looked up and around the room. "How about some of you standing up and telling us your name and how you felt when you came to your first meeting?" Ozzy raised her hand. "Okay, Ozzy, go ahead," said the lady. "I was very scared. My cousin said I practically squeezed his hand off." Several in the room chuckled. The lady smiled. "Now, Ozzy, are you glad you came?" "Yes, oh yes," replied Ozzy. "Thank you, Ozzy." She scanned the room again. A man in the back raised his hand. "Artur, please stand and tell us how you felt," said the lady. "Well, Arshwea, you were not in the first meeting that I attended, or in the meeting I attended first. I was a wee boy, maybe 9 or 10, and when I came in the circle, there were 12 to 15 very large, stout men, and I just knew one of them was going to tan my hide." There were more chuckles passed around. "Did they?" asked Arshwea. "No, they laughed at me a lot, but they also taught me a lot. I've been coming for 50 or 55 years, and I'm very glad I came." Several more stood up and made their proclamations. "You see, Tajiia, we aren't here to hurt you. You can come out of hiding," stated Arshwaya. Tajiia's heart exploded out of her chest. They knew she was here, and she was their new person. Moreover, just how was she to come out of hiding? As soon as she became normal-sized and visible, they would know that she used the forbidden magic. Everyone looked around, but since there were over 100 people, none knew everyone. Some people only looked at the younger people. One of the men that had come down the spiral staircase put his hand on Arshwaya's arm. Dear, she is very scared. Perhaps some of the young witches and warlocks are ready for their test. He motioned to a young witch to his right. Allah, are you ready? Asked Arshwaya. Allah's mentor encouraged her. Go try. You've been in with us 11 months. If you try now, you can try at 12 and 13 months. Tajiia calmed herself as she processed witch and warlock. She walked to the end of the bench and then towards the front. When she still couldn't see, she walked farther out away from the benches. She saw a young girl around her age of 12. The girl was so nervous, the whole room filled with the feel of it. The girl's test was to light the candle with her magic. The girl did not achieve it, and Tajiia felt very badly for her. Tajiia, started the man who had touched Arshwaya's arm. Are you ready to come out of hiding now? Tajiia thought to herself that she wasn't hiding behind anything. She couldn't step out from behind a curtain or a wall. She had to step out from behind her magic. So she had to decide if she wanted them to know about her invisibility or her smallness. Tajiia's heart was racing as she undid the invisibility. All was quiet in the room. Suddenly, Tajiia was her normal size. But when all the people turned and looked at her, she immediately shrank herself back down. Everyone stay put, stated the man. We don't want to step on her. Tarkek, when you said fear, started Arshwaya. Chancellor Wyckolt said, she has magic already? Precisely why we're here, stated Arshwaya. And precisely why the castle has huntsmen everywhere, stated Tarkek. Arshwaya glanced back at the Chancellor and then at the witches and warlocks in the room. I'm sure Tajiia is the one in the prophecy. The line of kings in this land have feared her coming for generations. But with her, there will come a time where we don't have to live in secrecy anymore. The second man that had come down the spiral staircase pushed past Arshwaya and Tarkek. He squatted down and gazed at the floor. Then he stood up and said, Tajiia, watch this. He made himself smaller, only he was the size of a dwarf and not an ant. Then he was regular size again. I want to learn that, stated Bollock. Varant laughed and said, you have to light the candle first. Can I? Asked Bollock. I'm ready. Arshwaya motioned to her right. You must come around this way. Bollock got up and went to the candle. In an instant, a flame burst upon the wick and then went out. Varant got up and headed to Bollock. You need more patience. He motioned to where they had seen Tajiia. She still has her spell going. Bollock sighed and tried again. Meanwhile, the second man eased down the steps and looked for Tajiia. This tempted Tajiia to go invisible again, but she didn't want them to know she could do that too. The second man looked over his shoulder and said, what if you showed her the book for her? Raisler, exclaimed Chancellor Wyckolt. You don't expect her to be able to read it, do you? Tajiia reversed the spell and became normal size again. She said, Then her fear once again exploded through her. She shrank once more. Bollock had been about to light the candle once again. What if she's supposed to be small? Not a chance, said Varant. Can't you feel her fear? Not really, said Bollock. I just feel mine. That's why I'm having trouble. That's why I'm having a hard time lighting the candle. Raisler kept his eyes on Tajiia this time, and he bent down to pick her up. Tajiia became normal size once more. What else can you do? Asked Raisler. Nothing, said Tajiia. She glanced around the room, and her eyes lighted on Balak. Arswaya took the opportunity to descend the stairs and go to the column of books. She pulled the one that had Tajiia on the spine. Your book, she said as she handed it over. Now, it can't leave here until you pass certain tests. Tajiia took the book and looked back at Balak. Tests like that? She asked as she pointed. Raisler and Arswaya looked over at Balak. Raisler looked back. Well, that is a beginner test. Tajiia glanced around. She was very uncomfortable and felt trapped. Raisler turned to Balak. Come on and show her you can pass your test. Is that her normal size? Asked Balak. Barrett was still behind Balak, and he somewhat laughed. Does it matter? She's still this size. Either size she has held longer than you have held your flame. Tajiia scanned the people. She wanted to find Artur. He had said people laughed at him, and she also wanted to know if anyone else from her village was here. If there were people from her village here, then she knew they would turn her into the king, so she might not could return or stay in her village any longer. Balak lit the candle, and this time the flame stayed. Allah was very downcast. Balak had only been coming to meetings for 6 or 7 months. Tajiia glanced down at the book in her hands. She rubbed a hand across the cover, and then she read the spine. She opened the book and saw writing on the first page. Then she flipped through to where she saw blank pages. Arswaya watched her carefully. From the prophecy, she knew the girl's story did not start today. But without permission, she could not see or read the magically written script within. Raisler also watched her. Tajiia turned back to the first page and briefly read the passage there. She didn't know what the others saw, but she read, Akela reached her sister Gasel's house. Not many knew their relationship, and that was critical. Akel reached the house just after the midwife left. Gasel's baby was weak and most likely wouldn't make it through the night. The next morning, the baby was still. Akela spoke with Gasel and her husband, and they agreed to take Tajiia and raise her. Akela warned them that although Tajiia was only 2 weeks old, she had already showed signs of magic. Gasel and her husband understood. Once night came, Akela left with the still baby, and Gasela and her husband kept Tajiia as their own. Tajiia pushed her eyebrows together and slightly shook her head. Arswaya gently placed her hand over the book. We have many activities tonight. You can read this later. Tajiia looked up at them. Tears threatened to roll down her face as she realized she never knew her parents. But the parents that raised her risked their lives for her. Raisler said quietly, We don't know what you read. We can't read without permission. To us, the pages look blank. We believe you are the one of the prophecies. So right now, we need to get you initiated. He gently took the book from her and handed it back to Arswaya. Then he led Tajiia to the candle. It is your turn to light the candle. Tajiia looked at the candle, which no longer had a flame because Chancellor Wyckolt had snuffed it out with a candle snuffer. And then she looked to where Balak and Varant sat. But, started as Ozzy, today is her first day. Arswaya smiled gently. Do you wish to test first? Ozzy wasn't sure, but Merrick gently pushed her towards the end of the bench and guided her to the candle. As Ozzy walked up to the candle, she recited the spell in her mind. Her first attempt was much like Balak's, and the candle only stayed lit a fraction of a second. Then she tried again and again. Finally, on her 5th try, the candle stayed lit. Ozzy smiled broadly. She was happy because she knew she would get to stay in the group, at least until her next test. Raisler motioned for Tajiia to go as Chancellor Wyckolt snuffed out the flame again. Tajiia wasn't sure exactly which spell they expected her to do, but she decided to use a flame jump spell instead of creating a flame. As soon as the flame jumped from another candle in the room to the test candle, Bollock was on his feet shouting, "That's not fair! She cheats!" "Bollock, sit down," stated Farron as he pulled Bollock down. Otter laughed. "I say she lit the candle. And very cleverly, too." Chancellor Wadcott dug out a scroll and opened it. He was immediately reading. He held up a finger. No. The rules very clearly say, create a flame to light the candle." He rolled the scroll back up. "Something was clearly created," shouted a warlock in the back. "The other candle is still lit, so a second flame was created." Arshwaya laughed and held up her hands. "I appreciate the arguments on both sides." She looked at Tajiia. "Now, Tajiia, I want you to know exactly where this candle is, because I'm going to extinguish all the other candles in the room, and you are doing the test again." Then Arshwaya started magically extinguishing all the candles in the room. Raisler whispered to Tajiia, "It's okay to show off a little. Some of us need a little hope." Tajiia had never shown off. Her mother had strictly told her not to. Her mother had risked her life so Tajiia could live. What had that been for? Tajiia wanted to read the rest of the book. Instead, she held her hands out before herself, and all in the room could see a ball of flame cupped in her hands. Then she had little flames fly up and light all the candles in the room, until the only candle not lit was the test candle. She walked slowly to the test candle and spread her palms out so that the ball of flame dropped down onto the test candle. All the flames in the room flickered like normal. The Chancellor held his hand over the candle and said, "Well, that's certainly passing." "You didn't hold your hand over the others," said a witch in the crowd. "The others may not have had any heat." "Well, I too say Tajiia passed, and we will continue with the other tests," stated Arshwaya. "Tajiia, you will take all the tests that others take today." "How is that fair?" asked several witches and warlocks. Arshwaya made herself dwarf size, and then returned to normal. "I myself cannot go down to fairy or nymph size, much less as small as Tajiia did. She looked like a speck of dust on the floor. She is part of our group now, and I think it would be unfair to hold her back. If she can pass the test, then let her." Tajiia involuntarily stepped back. Raisler raised his hand to her shoulder and whispered in her ear, "You are among friends now. Yes, tests are exposure, but they also show how much our community needs to protect you." Tajiia turned back and looked at Raisler. Arshwaya motioned them off the stage and motioned to Chancellor Wadcott to proceed with the normal test. After each test, they gave Tajiia a chance to do the test. Some she passed easily, but some she stood on the stage with her forehead wrinkled. After a few minutes, she attempted to do something as similar as possible, and each time she didn't do it exactly. There were people saying she didn't pass, and people saying she did, and the Chancellor would read the rules. After this happened several times, Tajiia said, "You know, it would help if you read the rules before the test." Tajiia was frustrated, and at the same time she realized that she had never said so much to one person other than her parents. Her village considered her a mute. Things continued. After all the tests, there was a mentor match. Most mentors still matched with their current student, but a few changed. The group considered many witches and warlocks in the room new or young, and they had mentors and would have mentors until they passed certain tests. After that, some witches and warlocks would keep their mentors as mentors, but some would keep them as confidants and friends. Raisler became Tajiia's mentor, to which he quickly told her that he wasn't a magic mentor, as much as someone to tell her how the group worked. Finally, someone said the tree could hold no more time, and that they needed to leave. Tajiia didn't understand, and Raisler explained that the magic of the meeting area slowed time for them, in the special area and especially in the meeting hall, but they still had used some time outside and would need to get back before their villages missed them. Tajiia had many questions, but she had to leave. She followed the two men and the boy and the girl. The group of four noticed her trailing behind them, but they didn't say anything. They just continued down the path. At the end of the path, they each went their separate ways to get to their own village. Tajiia turned herself invisible when she was out of their sight. She wouldn't turn visible until she was safely in her house. Okay, writers, that is the end of chapter 2. What do you think so far? Leave a comment below on how you would feel if someone had part of your name, so you then tried to spy on them, and then suddenly they knew you were there. Would you be afraid? Would you take the test like Tajiia, or would you pretend that you couldn't do the test? Maybe fake them out. Or leave a comment on if you went to buy eggs and suddenly the woman took your hand and smelled it. Would that startle you? This story picks up much faster than the City of the Ancients. But in City of the Ancients, the characters had a lot of learning to do about the Ultrabarium, about the Ancients, about things that they weren't familiar with at all. So they had to learn all of that before they could fight the dissenters, before there could be that much action. Here in Tajiia, the reader sees that Tajiia has much magic and much knowledge already. Join me Tuesday for more jargon or writing prompt. If you have suggestions, leave it in the comments. Join me Friday for Chapter 3 of Tajiia, Martial Law. In between days, you can visit my website at www.bymichaela.com and read my character bios. I know I need to add more from City of the Ancients and Operatives, so I'm working on everything I can. Hopefully Tajiia's bio won't be in the place of Kirsha's. LOL. I'm just teasing. But things can get confusing when you're working on more than one story at a time. So, on that note, feel free to finish your story for Plot 1 before you start Plot 2. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and the bell so we can continue to write together. Send your latest chapter as PDF or Word document to writewithmichaela@gmail.com because I'm really looking forward to reading your stories. You know, if you don't have a chapter, you just have a scene. You just dove into your story. Like that scene I did with the cave. Just dove into it. I didn't have you start, didn't have you finish, or whatever. You're still stuck in the cave. But if you have a scene and you want me to read that I would be fine with that too. That would be fun too. And then I could ask you all kinds of questions, and then you can, finish out your chapter or even start the chapter, and that could be the ending scene for the chapter, whatever. It's just, this is so much fun. It's to create the whole world. You get to create everything. You get to create the mountains, you get to the flat land, you get to create the sun and the rain, you get rainbows or tornadoes, whatever you want to create. You get to make up the people, how they look, how they're dressed, everything. If they're in a village or a fantastic castle, or they just live in the woods, you get to create everything. And that makes it really, really, really fun. And I'm really looking forward to reading your stories to see what you create. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your participation. If you know someone who would like this video, then please share it with them. This is Michaela with Write with Michaela. Bye for now.